Welcome back to RBR, guys. And isn't that a sight to wake up to? 5 days into my time with the AMG GT here in the UK, and I've not gone even a few hours without driving this thing. Why? Because like all great stories, this is a bit of a love story. And it's a love story between us petrol heads and a certain type of engine layout. AMG's wonderful V8. So AMG, or rather I should say, the first necessary step in being a proper AMG. And boy, does the GT hit home hard. And in this last 5 days, there hasn't been a single scenario where I've driven this car and I haven't had a stupid grin on my face the whole time. Whether that was driving like a proper AMG GT should, tearing through country lane, or even slowing it down and going into comfort mode, and having to sit through traffic or drive at slower speeds because of this beautiful and pronounced V8. I've just loved it and I've just enjoyed it so much. In all the AMGs I've lived with, this has been the one with perhaps the best soundtrack that I've had the pleasure of living a little life with. And living life is exactly what I've done with the GT this week. I theorized when I first drove it that this car has all the ingredients to make it an amazing family supercar. And that was something that the previous GT could never hope to be, and I'd owned a ton of them, so I would know. This car is compromised versus the previous GT. There's no doubt it's a different format, and if it fails in being a daily, really what is the point in this car? So we're going to put it through the rigors of living with a 2+2 family. And of course, as always, I'll drive it hard and give you a detailed review as well. So let's see, are the naysayers right? And is the AMG GT not what it used to be? Or is this actually the savior for AMG fans? Guys, today's episode is sponsored by Salient. And if any of you are going on holiday soon or travel a lot like I do, you're going to want to bookmark this video because this is going to be an awesome travel hack for mobile data while you're abroad. Now guys, I recently returned from Dubai in the UAE. I love going there, but the thing I hate the most about going there is because it's not in a region my mobile operator allows me to use my phone minutes and data, I get charged a horrendous amount of money for accessing data. It's something like £12 for just 500 megabytes a day, which is pathetic. So what ends up happening, I end up topping up, my family ends up topping up, and at the end of the trip, I rack a bill of hundreds of pounds. This time though, I didn't do that because I had this sponsor in the past who was Saley, and it's an eSIM that you can install just once on your phone. It covers 160 countries, 8 different regions, and the great thing is you only have to install the eSIM once. So you don't have to do it for multiple regions. And then the other great thing is the price. So for example, while I was in Dubai, I got the 5 GB package, which was $10.99, which is 100% more than the pathetic 500 MB that my network provider was giving me. And that's all I needed to do on the trip. I could hotspot with my kids and they could use the data. Because most of these phones are dual SIM now, my normal phone was still active, but I was using the Saley eSIM instead to make calls, do my Instagram and YouTube stuff for you guys, and it hardly cost me anything by the end of the trip. It's been an absolute game changer. It works on iOS and Android. You've got 24/7 support. You avoid a lot of these scammers who are selling you SIM cards as you arrive locally in a lot of these countries. And the other great thing, if you're traveling in a region and multiple countries, you can buy a regional pass instead and then use that data across the region. I'm going away again to Saudi Arabia at the end of this year and I plan to use it once again because it was just hassle-free. So like I said, bookmark this, save it. It's a great travel hack. And you don't need to wait at all. You can actually pre-buy this. And then when you arrive, it will activate. I absolutely love it. And with RBR as a viewer, you'll get 15% off as well. It's something that I used while I was abroad as well. Use this QR code here or use the code REMOVE at the link that I'm showing here below. So again, either use the QR code or the code REMOVE. Guys, a huge thanks for supporting our regular sponsors. And I hope they're as useful for you as they have been for me. Let's get back to the car. Now guys, before we head back on the road, and I'll show you all the different scenarios where this car is just simply a better daily car to live with and probably one of the best sports car dailies that you can buy in the market with basically no rival. I'll get onto that. First, a really important topic is positioning. What is the positioning of this new GT in the market? Because I think it actually holds a really unique spot versus its rivals, and if you don't understand the positioning, you won't understand or appreciate the car. And it's where I think I've seen a lot of keyboard warriors and even some reviewers give some really bad takes about the car, because they don't understand where this version of the GT is positioned and where the cars might go in the future. Now, yes, compared to the previous GT, it is not the same type of car. It's not a smaller, lighter, two-seat, mid-front engine, transaxle layout, dry sumped, purer rear-wheel drive sports car. I agree, it's different, okay? And that GT was, in all of its versions, pretty much exactly that formula, just with varying degrees of track effectiveness. So not a lot of differentiation, and I think this series will differentiate. But that format put this car squarely in the sights of, say, the British clone and the engine stealing Vantage, or some of the versions of the 911. Well, let's face it, a ton of two-seat sports cars back then, because back in the heydays of 2015, we had no shortage of two-seat sports cars. Now, this GT is not like that at all. It's not a two-seater to begin with, it's a 2+2-seater that shares its platform with another 2+2-seater, which is the SL Roadster. Instead of having the transaxle layout with the gearbox at the rear, we've got the engine and the gearbox mated here in the front, which frees up space for the first time ever in a GT for 4MATIC all-wheel drive. And all of this makes it a bigger car, including the interior, which is now much more tech-filled, and it's just a very different place for the GT series to start from. Now, all of these things can be viewed in a negative light, but it's actually these differences and these changes that endeared me towards the car in terms of it being a much better daily car, at least in these first versions of the GT. And we'll get more into that in a second. First, I want to give you guys a recap of what this car actually is. Let's start with the platform, which is from ground up by AMG. Of course, it started life in the SL, and it's a mix of material platform, making it a very rigid one. But in the GT, they actually built upon the rigidity that the SL's version had, which is often happens the other way, where the Roadsters build on rigidity of the coupes. This coupe is even more rigid, as it should be. Then we come to the best part, the V8 engine. You absolute beauty. This is an engine that traces its heritage back to the GTR, the E63s, the C63s, the G63. It is the world's prime V8, and I love it so, so much. And as AMG were marketing this car, so AMG, I'm glad they finally woke up, because this is truly a real expression of AMG, as you guys have seen. Now, we'll talk power in a minute, but that V8 is paired to a good gearbox, a 9-speed multi-clutch gearbox, which is great. And of course, this format frees up space for the 4MATIC all-wheel drive system, which can send 100% of power to the rear, and it does most of the time, keeping this feeling really pure, or 50% to the front. Now, this larger shape and this format makes this a heavier car, almost at, I think it's just beyond 1900 kg, so not unlike something like a DB12. But this car has a secret weapon to deal with this added weight, and that is a very clever suspension system. In this case, a semi-active one that works via hydraulic pumps that can basically make the GT from 0 to extremely stiff in an instant. There's no need for roll bars, so they are taken out and it saves weight, and we have further hydraulic connections for your compression and your rebound, essentially making this car have body control like the series has never had. And that's why, despite being larger and heavier, it drives so damn well, as you will see later in the video. The SP system, the rear differential, are configured specifically for the GT. In that regard, we've got specific tyres for the GT and the S5s as well. And we've got active aerodynamics, as we saw in the GTR. For example, the controllable flaps here in the front. We've got the Venturi effect spoiler that's hidden underneath the front here, again coming from GTR. And on the back, we've got the active wing at multiple stages. That is if you don't go for the really cool looking aerodynamics package, which has it at the best possible place from the start. And in case you're wondering versus SL, all of these things have either different hardware components or totally different software in the GT, because what is a modern car if not the result of different software and a lot of testing? Now, the V8 powers, let's talk about this. There are 4 different versions of the V8 GT already, actually, and 2 of them you'll be quite familiar with. The first one is this, the one we are testing today, which is the first one, the GT63 5 8.5 brake horsepower, same as the old GTR, 800 Newton meters, and a 0 to 60 that we actually tested at sub 3 seconds. We will test that again today. Again, enormously powerful, super quick. So really quite fast already, perhaps too fast, and we'll get onto that in a second. The other one that you'll be familiar with is the GT63 Pro. Taking the name of the GTR Pro special track version before, this one feels a bit more like an S model. A bit more power, a different front end with better cooling, a bit of massaging underneath the skin, and a new front end, which looks really quite good. But yeah, a bit more of an S model to me in feeling. Then we have the GT63 SE Performance, which is the fastest AMG ever, according to them, even faster than the Project One, but weighs as much as the moon. And we will come back to that car another day in a different video. Then the one that you perhaps haven't heard that much about because it hasn't really been tested yet, and that is the GT55. This still uses the V8. It's just under 500 brake horsepower, but technically speaking, it is identical to the GT63. It still has active engine mounts, it still has all the cleverness in the differential, all the suspension bits, everything, nut and bolt, is the same. Just a little bit less power and a lot more affordable. This could be the Goldilocks of the bunch, and we will talk more about that in the future when I get my hands on one. Finally, there is another car that I didn't want to tell you about, but it does exist and it is coming to many regions, including the UK, and that's the GT43 with a 4-cylinder engine. But don't worry, we can basically consider it a concept car because, let's face it, I'm not going to let any of you buy this one. So guys, that's the engine lineup. Now let's start to talk about practicality, and we must start with the interior, where this is just so far ahead of everything else in class. As usual, the nice welcome screens that you get in the AMG screens. And this entire system is just so far ahead of the competitors in this space particularly. And it's because the car takes literally tons of things out of the S-Class and the E-Class and the best that Mercedes-Benz has to offer. Oh, hang on. I don't care if the car's not even on. That is always staying on. Exhaust on or else, my friends. So the structure of the GT interior is literally carryover from the previous GT, whether that's the positioning of the vents, the way the cowl is, this V8-shaped center console, or Nakaduck-shaped one as they started calling it later. The only difference being that you now have the S-Class and C-Class style screen in the middle instead of the screen hanging over there. Otherwise, like I showed you in my last video, and do check that out because I did a bit of interior VFX, this is identical to the previous GT. A lot of people say it's similar to the SL. No, it's actually similar to the GT. But this is where it gives its rivals a bloody nose, whether that's a 911, whether that's the Aston Martins with their new system that isn't actually very good. MBUX is simply superior in every regard. And the great thing about it is that it's a brilliantly simple UX, okay? It's easy to navigate. It's got nice large touch points. We've got controls either via touch here or even via the steering wheel, so that when you're driving, it's easier than kind of looking down that way with all then the haptic feedback, etc. And the best vocal assistant that the car market has at the moment. Hey Mercedes, turn the ambient lighting to blue.
Okay, I'm changing the colour.
And turn on my heated seats.
Seat heating is switched on.
And finally, give me a massage.
I'm switching on the massage for you.
So there you go, 3 commands with the car, still listening, easy to do, don't need to learn anything, and it actually actions them rather than telling you to bugger off. Now the GT has got ventilated seats. As you saw, we've got massaging seats in here as well, with a choice of different ones. Of course, we've got all the ambient lighting stuff, you're all used to that. We've got energizing comfort to keep you nice and fresh when you're doing long journeys. And for a big car, it's important that we have 360-degree camera, which of course the GT has as well. Now the massage element, the ventilated seats, the 360 cam, the massive heads-up display, this is stuff that the old GT never had. This is stuff that a lot of the competitors just don't have as well. Heck, this car has even got the rain wipers from the S-Class, where it shoots out the water from the wipers rather than a horrible spray all over your car. Now that's just the Mercedes side of things, making the GT experience better in terms of tech and comfort. But the sporting side is also better thanks to this new system. For example, we go into here and you get AMG Performance. And this gives you a ton of readouts in terms of what's happening with the car in terms of its suspension, which is really useful with this semi-active system. the lovely engine display. Let's turn the car on for a second. And you'll get your Newton meters, your horsepower, all of that fun stuff. You've got the IWC clock, etc. Beyond that, you've got track pace. And you've seen us use this many times, where you can either use this on track for track times, etc., or simply just use the drag race function to measure what you're doing. And not only do you have track pace here, you get track pace over here as well in your driver zone. Now again, what competitor is doing that? And forget the driver zone. If you want it, you can have it up here in your heads-up display as well. And nobody's doing that. And while you might poo-poo the technology side of things, these are useful things for the purposes of racing, for the purposes of using a sports car. And then remember, things like the holographic welcome light from the front lights, the light carpet on the car, all of these are the cherry on top of an already brilliant system that everyone else is very far behind on. And in terms of racing, how can we forget these brilliant drive control selectors that are so far ahead of the competition? I mean, you look at even in the 992.2, the piddly little red button they have for the drive control unit. This, no one's even close to it. And it's not just gimmicky, it is genuinely useful, because you can see what's going on here despite what the conditions are outside. And then of course you can completely customize what you have here via your settings select. You simply go into here and you have a ton of options what you want to show on here, whether you can even add the massaging bits, which you wouldn't want to do. You've got consumption, telemetry, we've got the heads-up display, 3D view, raising the vehicle level, because of course the GT now has the lift function thanks to the new suspension, and all of that you can tailor to yourself here. Heck, with the driving modes, you can even change the order into whatever you want. All these things make this car so much better to live with versus the previous one, versus competitors. And if you live with this and then you jump in one of those, they just feel lacking. And then remember, we've got the practicality of our wonderful seats in the back, and not just the seats, which I'll get onto in a minute. Let's talk about the practicality of the boot. Now, practicality. This is a big topic on GT for the new generation, and it's something I'm going on and on about in this video because it's actually quite an important thing as a differentiator versus the old cars and the rivals. It's still a hatchback rear boot, which is nice. If you're a GT customer or you've ever seen one, this will all be very familiar to you. But the difference comes here. And I don't know if you can tell just how huge this is, but even I can fit in there, and I did it the first time I saw the car. Now, some nice things, we do have an optional cover here for your luggage, and of course this bar removable as you find in other Mercedes-Benz, and you can split fold those two seats on the back down for even more luggage. But let's first just talk about the normal space, and to do that adequately and show how much more space you have in here versus something like my Touring, we've got some assistance. One, easy peasy. And there's two. And to prove that I can close it, and oh, by the way, GT gets this now, which I never had before. Let's shut it, and hopefully, there you go. Now this, I'm excited about that, right? Because as a GT customer and a customer of 911s, someone who's lived with the DB12 and the Vantage as well, there ain't no way you're even getting one of these full-size suitcases into a car like that. So when I reference in this video that the GT63 is kind of the car that now dethrones Turbo S in terms of being that practical sports car sleeper, this is why. Because it takes that idea of breadth of ability, practicality, mixed with crazy speeds to a level that we just have not had before in a car of this ilk. And remember, even though we've got those two massive suitcases, we still have our two seats in the rear. And if we wanted even more luggage space, you could probably fit a third suitcase and a bunch of hand luggage, where these will split fold down as well, making this, as far as I'm concerned, the sports car luggage king. Now, all of those elements mean that this is not only just a more practical car than the previous GT, but way ahead of all of its rivals. None of them can hope to match it in terms of practicality. They might better it in other ways, but in terms of having pure breadth of ability and being a family sports car, this is really quite hard to beat. And just to show you how brilliant it's been for me in the last 5 days with my 2+2 family, I want to show you some scenarios that I was using the car in. Let us start, for example, with the school run. Okay guys, prime example of when I love using the GT for normal things. I've been asked to do the school run and I've got a choice of a plethora of cars, but the one that is the most fun to take the kids out in is honestly the GT, because it's just a brute. Now normally in a situation like this, a super sports car like the GT wouldn't really be the right type of choice to go and pick up two kids with their school bags, PE bags, etc. But the great thing about the AMG GT now in this generation is that these first versions so practical for jobs like these as well. So instead of becoming that occasional used car now and then taking one of the kids or doing a few errands here and there, now this is a car that viably I can use and enjoy like this, doing something that would otherwise be, you know, kind of a mundane task, right? Part of the routine. Instead, you make your routine so exciting. That's what I love about this car. That's what the old one, like, I could not have done this job today in the previous GT or in something like a Vantage, and you'd probably struggle in something like a DB12 because the boot is non-existent, as is the seating. So this is where I've had the joy of it. It's making the routine things, the boring things that normally you'd have to go and pick the more practical car to do stuff in. Instead, you'll put a smile on your face doing those normal things in this car, and you'll also put a smile on their face when they see the car come to pick them up.
Got 4 seats.
It's got 4 seats, hasn't it? Isn't that good?
Yeah.
So you can sit in it with Dad. Yeah, high five. Good boy. Doesn't that mean the world? Yeah. Here is the second son who's trying to shove all his bags in the front. That's not going to work. Okay. Is that good enough?
Yeah.
Good boy. So guys, we're in the car for a very spontaneous plan this evening. Boys, say hi.
Hello.
Hi.
Mrs. AMG's hiding over here because she doesn't want to be on cam, which is fine. And we've made a plan to go and have dessert. And again, why not go in your supercar when you can? And this is the only one that can do it. We've got self-driving on here because the GT has that now. We've got massaging seats on because the GT has that now. And off we go to have a dessert together as a family of 4. And to me, that is amazing, particularly as a GT owner, to be able to enjoy these cars, you know, with your family, either in comfort or having a little bit of fun in them. And I know I keep repeating the same thing, but that's why this car is so cool. So guys, we have had awful weather today. It's been like torrential rain overnight. So much so that we've had flood warnings locally and trees falling and all that kind of fun stuff. And like I said, this is the type of weather where I'd normally never take a car out of the GT's ilk, the former GT anyway. New GT, 4MATIC Plus, it really doesn't care. And the new S5 tyres from Michelin are again such a great complement to that 4MATIC system. And look, it doesn't make you invincible, but certainly the 4MATIC gives this car the ability to do things throughout the year, throughout conditions that you just wouldn't consider in a rear-wheel driven 500 horsepower sports car. Still achieving 3.2 seconds with hardly any slip. And you guys are experienced enough to know if this was rear-wheel driven, no chance of doing that. And then how does that translate into the rest of life of living a car like this? It means that you can use more of the power, more of the time, enjoy the car to a much fuller extent. And I think that actually means the world, particularly in a country like the UK. Now, other than the G63, it's safe to say that AMG fans have been starving recently. We have been that guy walking through the desert looking for just a drop of water, thinking that he sees an oasis somewhere, but it's just a 4-cylinder ship pond. Enter then the new AMG GT, and even AMG knows so AMG. Is it all the engine? I think that's a big part of it. We will always need something like this, something engaging, something exciting that makes you want to drive faster, that engages you with the entire experience of the car. And you can see, it's absolutely ridiculous for a 2024 car. And it's not just the pops and bangs, forget the pops and bangs. You can even go into comfort, exhaust on, and you get a lovely rumble. A lot of that is the mic that we have in the exhaust system, picking up the sound and delivering it to us here inside the cabin. I think that's fine. I'd rather have that than have no sound. We've seen what a car is like without that gimmick when I drove the UK CLE 53, and the car literally has zero emotion about it. This well, A, it's bloody loud on the outside, but B, the rumble that you get inside, which is delivered from your engine, well, why not? So sound is a great part in this, and it really is what tickles the AMG customer. And it's been a bit of a blessing and a curse for AMG, I think, this, because they've been so successful because of it, but in recent times, it's hindered their progress. And it was never just emissions by itself, the EU, it was noise regulations as well. And I think when it boils down to it this week, what I've enjoyed the most and what's made me want to order this car immediately is the soundtrack. I just think it's incredible. And then when you start to add everything else in the mix, all the things we talked about in terms of practicality, all those scenarios where I'm still using this car, all the tech on offer as well, and of course, just how amazing this car looks, it becomes an almost irresistible package, made only better by the speed. And to do that, let's do a launch control, right? So to do this, we are going to put the screen in front into track pace. We will also put our heads-up display into track pace, which the car can do. What competitor does this? Nobody. Then we're going to go into race mode, foot on the brake, and let's see what this car manages 0 to 60. Race start. Oh, the speed of this thing! And look at that 0 to 60 again. So easily doing 2.9 seconds. The grip of the 4MATIC with the S5 tyres is just so absolute. And let's look at this through the lens of the GTs before it. That is much quicker than the 3.2 I could manage in my GT Black Series, which was the top version of that car. And let's look at rivals. That's on par with 911 Turbo, okay? And let's talk about Vantage for a second. Now, I've not done a launch in the new Vantage yet. They haven't even let me drive it. My mate Matt Watson over at Carwell, though, did about 69 launch controls in order to try and get a good time, and only managed, after a lot of tinkering and all the engineers there, 3.6 seconds. Now I get it, it's well over 600 horsepower, only rear-wheel drive, etc. But the claimed figure is 3.4, so this is just way off. And as a car that people keep comparing to the GT, well, the GT is just faster. And yes, while that car may have better dynamism in some way, I don't know, I haven't driven it yet. And remember, right now, we're not at a track with a bunch of engineers surrounding us, helping us out in the perfect conditions. This is just a car on the roads. Of course, then just forget about DB12 as well. And of course, this is the benefit of 4MATIC. While we might lose a bit of that steering purity, and of course it adds a bit of weight, what you cannot argue is that the grip on offer and the ability to put down speed in every scenario and quicker out of a corner is simply undisputed. And this is the type of grip, the type of speed that you'll be using in everyday scenarios all the time. Then we come to handling. And the GT, for a car of this size, for a car of this weight, just handles incredibly well. Like, way better than it should. For an all-wheel drive car, the steering is really communicative. It's pointy, you've got the rear-wheel steer helping you as well, and it just feels like a car on rails, much like the old AMG GTR did. And really, the car shrinks in its size and its weight the faster you go. Particularly amazing is how the handling changes in Sport Plus. In Comfort, it's got a bit of give, and you'll feel some of that roly-poliness, but in Sport Plus, it's just flappable. The other great thing is how well the engine and the gearbox work together. Like I said, multi-clutch gearbox, unlike the slow torque converters that a lot of cars these days use, particularly at BMW M and Audi, this is a much quicker shifting style of gearbox. And it only adds to the experience of a car like the GT, so that's great. And when you look at it through even the lens of the previous GT, this car is just so dominant on the same type of roads that that car was great on, that you don't really miss that element. Track driving is different, and AMG haven't even set a time for this car, which I think makes sense considering the type of car it is. The handling is honestly nothing like what you think the figures are. And you must understand, modern cars, the suspension is so good, the chassis, the rigidity, the software, everything they have in play. A lot of you guys just look at the weight figure and just give these cars a lot of stick, like you gave the M5, like you originally gave the GT, but you need to realise how far things have come along now. And when you do, and then you drive one of these and you realise that the only thing you're scared about driving fast is how wide the car is, then the whole breadth of ability thing begins to make sense, because you've got all that practicality, but you maintain the dynamism when and where you need it, particularly in a daily. Since I've been driving this car, so many of my friends have asked me, would you drive this or your GT3 Touring? And it's been a tough question, but I think I've found the way to answer it. For me, the GT3 and the GT3 Touring is like the perfect meal. It's like grilled salmon with vegetables, some mashed potatoes, your perfect macros, perfect carb, fat, protein. That's not what the GT is. The GT is like a smash burger with fries. It's like the comfort food of the car world. It's a nice hot pizza pie just out the oven, right? That's what the GT is. It might not be the best for you, say on track. But I'll be damned if it's the one that you don't enjoy the most all the time. And again, tool for a purpose, a car that's not trying to be a track car, but is trying to be the ultimate AMG daily with breadth of ability. This kind of hits it on the head. And I love my GT3, but it's the track car, it's the precise tool. It's not necessarily the one that I will go out and look for tons of emotion in, just driving normally, because it wants to be driven much faster. So let's say you just head back into comfort mode and you're just driving on these awful roads that you find in most UK towns. And unlike the previous GT that would jar you because it was much more of a, single-use tool. Whereas this kind of settles down almost into a kind of an S-Class coupe type feeling when you're driving it normally in and around town. And I actually think this car brings a lot from that car, which is great because that car is really beloved to a lot of us. And that gets better than town is fine. You go on a motorway, and again, this car is beyond the previous GT in that regard. So there we are, we're on the motorway, comfort mode engaged, exhaust on, suspension is nice and supple, just feels like you're driving a normal Mercedes-Benz coupe. Now what's cool is, because we've got driving assistance package, we just tap the set button on the steering wheel here, and now the car will steer itself. Just like your other Mercedes-Benz cars. And again, never had this in GT. This is brilliant. And not only that, you can even tell the car to change lane. So now the GT will change lane by itself. Now you do need to somewhat hold the steering wheel, but the car is, look, it steered itself and it's changed lane itself. Name me another sports car that can do that. So it's comfortable, it's driving itself, it will stop, start, all the adaptive cruise control stuff, all the self-driving stuff. This is great. And again, look at competitors. Who's going to be doing this? Look at the daily ability. Look at what it adds to the entire equation. Stuff like this really matters for a daily car. So all that practicality and all the times I'm enjoying with it, plus all the tech on offer versus before, and that inflated price tag almost starts to make sense. But equally then it doesn't, and I think sales will struggle until Mercedes as a whole company starts to sort their pricing out. Regardless, until that happens, let's ignore the GT63 for a second. We can have all of this fun in the GT55, and it's about £20,000 cheaper as well. I think that is going to be the AMG that most of us will now go for. And forget the GT63 Pro, I think the GT55 will sit just as well as this car on the road because this feels too fast for the road anyway. Now, how successful has this GT been in doing what it set out to? Let's sign off and have a talk about it now. This GT has to be the poster boy for breadth of ability. This past week, I've put this car through things that its predecessor could never handle, nor its rivals. It's lived with me as a man with a 2+2 family, and we've done everything together. But it's not like it's suddenly lost its sporting prowess either. This will rip through any road like a hot rod, come rain, shine, or whether you have the kids in the back. And remember, this is your first GT in the series. They've made the Pro. Do you really think that they're not going to go further, having made the quickest track car in the world last time round? Now, this is the start of the daily story, and I can't think of any other sports car that does this job so completely. I think that car used to be Porsche's 911 Turbo. I've owned that car, and for me, this dethrones it completely. A daily fun car needs to put a stupid grin on your face daily, in every scenario. Now, I don't think this car is ever going to get the credit from magazines, etc. It's not going to be on any Car of the Year shoots, battling out for Car of the Year. But that's only a testament to how people don't understand this. But you guys, AMG fans, you get this car. This car goes back to AMG's roots, with that duality of purpose being a crazy supercar looking hot rod with the ability for you to still live with it daily. And yes, it's bigger, and yes, it's heavier, but it's got dynamic ability born of engineering prowess, and I think it can dismiss almost all of its rivals without a second thought. We were starving, and I think AMG have not only fed us, they've fed us really well. So AMG, they say? You're damn right.